Hello everyone and welcome to part 2 of my first episode of Backtracking, still covering Project A6. I would have gotten this done earlier, but weird kind of circumstances happened. I just finished eating not long ago, so we're just going to get right down to it. So yeah. Anyway, after a brief break, like for a day, we move on to the band's 6th album, Rival Factions, which coincidentally is the album which contains the first Project A6 songs that I ever heard in the form of the song just Put Your Lips to the TV, which I first heard on the soundtrack of SmackDown vs. Raw 2009. The album itself explores a more eclectic style, including influences from gothic rock, post-punk, new wave, and even some 80s stuff in there. And even with all these sounds, the album is actually a pleasant surprise, with a lot of people probably expecting it to be kind of a mess, but it actually works. There's so many of the good songs on there as well, including Put Your Lips to the TV. Other songs are like, Pull Me Closer, Violent Dance to the Caveman Jam, and of course Evil, a Chorus of Resistance, which I think is one of the band's best known songs. The album definitely deserves more recognition than it actually gets. While it's far from the best work, it's surprisingly enjoyable and in places a lot of fun. Also, my cat is here, just casually cleaning himself. Next up is their 2009 album and 7th album overall, we're almost done guys, Picket Fence Cartel. Besides having one of the coolest album titles in the band's history and one of the coolest album titles I've ever heard, there's not really much I can say without repeating myself, but damn it, I'm gonna try. It's clear that P86 wanted to aim for a much heavier sound with Picket Fence Cartel, reminiscent of the Drawing Black Lines and Burn Your Bridges days, but with a slightly more modern twist for the time. It works really well here, pretty much taking what was already great about them and managing upon that. Picket Fence Cartel feels like the proper sequel to Songs to Burn Your Bridges by. I know that I bring that album up a lot, but trust me, it's for good reason. Picket Fence Cartel also stands out as the last album to feature guitarist Randy Torres and bassist Stephen Dale, with And the Rest Will Follow being the last appearance of longtime drummer Alex Albert, being replaced by Jason Gurkin for Rival Factions. However, in spite of all of the lineup changes, it didn't slow the band down one bit as we moved to my first proper P86 album that I listened to all the way through in Wait for the Siren. While it feels a bit drawn out at times, it's still a pretty good album, adding a much more epic feel to their work that would remind anyone really of the style of 30 Seconds to Mars, but in a much heavier way, carrying a much more warlike theme to it. Wait for the Siren feels very much like a concept album in that way, which is pretty cool. As I mentioned, I like a good concept album, and while Siren isn't one strictly speaking, it feels like one. It's definitely worth a listen, especially if you're as late to the party as I am when I'm actually out listening to an album by them. By the way, when I say like the first one I listened to all the way through, like I got into the band around about 2012. Wait, the song came out in 2012. That's when I listened to it. So yeah. And finally, we reached the end of. Well, it's not really the end. I'm sure that the band has more stuff to come soon. Actually, they're doing a fundraising website thing to actually put out a double album, which I'm hoping to see soon. But anyway, we've reached the last album that they've released thus far, which is Nights of the Future. Anyone who's watched my channel before would know that I did a top 10 list of my favourite albums of 2014. This album was on that list, I believe at number 10, and for good reason. Building upon the more epic sound and adding more experimentation while keeping to their signature heavier sound and roots, Nights of the Future is a great follow-up to Wait for the Siren, and actually manages to hold a great concept to it as well. What that concept is, I'm not 100% sure, but who cares? The album sounds great. It's definitely one of the best examples of mixing everything they've done so far into one huge pot of awesome to make something even more awesome. I highly recommend the album. I highly recommend a lot of these. And that's it for my first ever episode of Backtracking. I hope that you all enjoyed it because this is something that I've been wanting to do for a while and I'm glad that I finally can. As I mentioned, I started actually writing for it around about late April-ish, and it's taken me this long to actually film it. Anyway, as I mentioned at the end of my last video, if you have a suggestion for a band that you would like me to listen to do an episode of Backtracking on, then feel free to leave in the comments below. I do apologise if I don't get right to it because I do have some other bands I want to go through. But yeah, leave your comments anyway. I do have one rule when you suggest a band, however. They have to have at least 3 or more albums out. That's pretty much all I have to say. Feel free to like and subscribe if you so wish. I'll see you in my next video, whenever that may be. Well, we know when that'll be. That'll be Friday when I review the next episode of The Ultimate Fighter. My next Backtracking episode, whenever that may be. Take care. Peace.